The autumn mist clung to the Tennessee Valley like a shroud, and Sarah Mitchell had no idea that the wounded man bleeding on her doorstep would change everything she thought she knew about survival, loyalty, and the price of compassion in a world torn apart by war. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first arrow whistled past Sarah Mitchell's ear as she bent over her vegetable garden, the fletching so close she could feel the brush of feathers against her cheek. She dropped to her knees instinctively, dirt grinding into her cotton dress as another shaft embedded itself in the wooden fence post beside her head with a dull thunk. "Get inside, Sarah!" Her neighbor Thomas Brennan's voice carried across the clearing from his own homestead, panic threading through his usual calm demeanor. She could see him crouched behind his plow horse, rifle already in his hands, scanning the tree line that bordered their small settlement in the Cumberland Valley. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she crawled toward her cabin, keeping low. The October air, which had been crisp and pleasant moments before, now felt charged with danger. She could hear the distinctive war cries echoing from the forest. Cherokee warriors, she realized with a chill that ran deeper than the morning. Frost. Their settlement of Millbrook Hollow had been relatively peaceful for the past 2 years, but tensions between the white settlers and the Cherokee Nation had been building like storm clouds on the horizon. She reached her cabin door just as her father, William Mitchell, appeared in the doorway, his weathered face grim as he clutched his old musket. At 62, he had fought in enough conflicts to recognize the sound of impending battle. "How many?" Sarah gasped, pressing her back against the log wall. "Can't tell yet," William replied, his eyes never leaving the forest edge. "But enough. To make this interesting, where's your brother?" "James went to check the trap lines this morning," Sarah said, her stomach dropping. Her 19-year-old brother was somewhere in those same woods where Cherokee warriors were now moving like shadows between the trees. A musket ball splintered the wood near William's head, and he ducked back inside, pulling Sarah with him. "We'll make our stand here," he said, moving to the window and carefully positioning his rifle barrel through a gap between the logs. "Keep your powder dry and your head down." Sarah reached for her own rifle, a skill her father had insisted she master. Despite her mother's protests, before consumption had claimed her 3 years prior. Every woman on the frontier needed to know how to defend herself, William had argued, and events like this proved him right. The attack intensified over the next hour. Musket balls thudded into their cabin walls, and smoke began to drift across the clearing from Thomas Brennan's barn, which had caught fire. Sarah could see other settlers running between buildings, some making desperate stands, others trying to escape toward the main road that led to the larger town of Franklin, 15 miles southeast. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the chaos. Sarah and her father waited, weapons ready, listening for any sound that might indicate whether the raiders had moved on or were planning something else. The acrid smell of gunpowder and burning wood filled the cabin. "Stay put," William whispered, moving carefully to peer through a crack in the shutters. Could be a trick. They waited until the sun reached its zenith before venturing outside. The damage was extensive, but not total. Thomas Brennan's barn was a smoldering ruin, and the Hendersons' cabin showed signs of being ransacked, but most of the settlement remained intact. More importantly, they could find no bodies, a sign that this had been a raiding party intent on driving them away, rather than a war party bent on massacre. "They took some horses and supplies," Thomas reported when the surviving settlers gathered, in the center of their small community. His left arm was bound with a makeshift bandage where a Cherokee blade had found its mark. "But they didn't push the attack when they could have overrun us, almost like they were testing our defenses," William nodded grimly. "Or sending a message. The Cherokee are getting pressure from all sides. White settlers moving into their hunting grounds, other tribes being pushed west, the government in Nashville making promises they can't keep. This might just be the beginning. As if to underscore his words, young Billy Cartwright came running down the main trail, his face flushed from hard riding. "Riders coming!" he called out. "Looks like a militia from Franklin." The militia patrol, led by Captain Joshua Reynolds, arrived within the hour. Reynolds was a career soldier, lean and hard-eyed, with the kind of confidence that came from years of frontier warfare. He listened to their account with professional interest, occasionally asking pointed questions about the Cherokee tactics and numbers. "You were lucky," he concluded after hearing their story. "What you faced was likely a scouting party for something bigger. We've had reports of Cherokee war bands gathering in the mountains to the east. Chief Red Eagle's been making speeches about driving the white man back across the Cumberland River. What do you recommend?" William asked. "Pack what you can carry and come with us to Franklin," Reynolds replied without hesitation. "This valley's too isolated to defend properly, and if Red Eagle's planning what we think he's planning, you'll need more than a handful of farmers with hunting rifles to survive it." The suggestion created immediate division among the settlers. Some, like the Brennans and the Cartwrights, were ready to abandon their homes and start over in a safer location. Others, including William Mitchell, had invested too much blood, sweat, and tears in their land to give it up without a fight. "I built this place with my own hands," William said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "My wife is buried on that hill behind our cabin. I'm not running from a fight, especially not when it means abandoning everything I've worked for." Sarah found herself torn between practicality and loyalty. Part of her wanted to convince her father to leave with the militia, the logical part that recognized their precarious position. But another part, the part that remembered her mother's last words about keeping the family together and honoring their commitments, understood why he couldn't abandon their home. "How long before this Red Eagle makes his move?" she asked Captain Reynolds. "Hard to say," Reynolds admitted. "Could be days, could be weeks. Cherokee warfare isn't like fighting regular soldiers. They choose their time and place, hit fast and hard, then disappear back into the mountains. But when they come, in force they come to win." The captain and his men stayed the night, helping to reinforce the settlement's defenses and sharing what intelligence they had about Cherokee movements in the region. Sarah learned that Red Eagle, whose English name was Marcus Thornfield, was a war chief of mixed heritage who had been educated in white schools before returning to lead his people. This made him particularly dangerous, as he understood both Cherokee tactics and white military strategy. "He's not just fighting for territory," Reynolds explained as they worked to strengthen the palisade around the settlement's center. "He's fighting for his people's survival. Makes him unpredictable and absolutely ruthless when he needs to be." As evening fell, the militia captain made one final attempt to convince the remaining settlers to evacuate. "I can't force you to leave," he told them, "but I can tell you this. If Red Eagle comes for this valley in force, we might not be able to reach you in time to help. You'll be on your own." William Mitchell's response was typical of his character, direct and uncompromising. "Then we'll make them pay dearly for whatever they take." That night, Sarah lay awake listening to the sounds of the forest beyond her cabin walls. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made her wonder if Cherokee warriors were moving through the darkness, preparing for another attack. The uncertainty was almost harder to bear than the actual fighting had been. She thought about her brother James, still missing somewhere in the wilderness. Had he been captured, killed? Was he even now making his way back to warn them of some greater danger? The not knowing gnawed at her like a physical pain. When dawn finally broke, it brought with it a sight that changed everything. Sarah was drawing water from their well when she saw him, a lone figure stumbling out of the forest, clearly wounded, and moving with the careful gait of someone fighting to stay conscious. Her first instinct was to call for her father, to raise the alarm that might indicate another Cherokee attack. But something about the figure's movement, the way he clutched his side and struggled to stay upright, made her hesitate. As he drew closer, she could see that he was indeed Cherokee, tall and lean, with the distinctive features and dress of a warrior. But he was also clearly in desperate need of help. Blood seeped through his fingers where he pressed them against his ribs, and his breathing was labored and shallow. The smart thing to do would be to alert the other settlers, to treat him as the enemy he undoubtedly was. Cherokee warriors didn't wander into white settlements by accident, especially not the morning after a raid. He could be a scout, gathering intelligence for another attack. He could be armed and dangerous despite his apparent injuries. But Sarah Mitchell had been raised by parents who believed in Christian charity, even toward their enemies. Her mother, Elizabeth, had often said that a person's true character was revealed not in how they treated their friends, but in how they treated those who had wronged them. The Cherokee warrior collapsed to his knees just 20 yards from her cabin, his strength finally failing him. Blood was pooling in the dirt beneath him, and Sarah realized that whatever threat he might have posed was rapidly being overtaken by his need for immediate medical attention. She looked toward her father's cabin, then back at the wounded man. Making a decision that would haunt her for weeks to come, she set down her water bucket and approached him cautiously. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had initially thought. Probably no more than 25, with strong, angular features marked by pain and exhaustion. His injuries appeared to be from musket balls rather than knife wounds, suggesting he had been in a firefight with other white settlers, possibly even militia. "Can you understand English?" she asked quietly, kneeling just out of arm's reach. His dark eyes focused on her with difficulty, and he nodded slightly. "Yes," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you alone?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Again, a nod. Separated from the others. Been walking all night. Sarah glanced around to make sure they weren't being observed, then made the decision that would change both their lives. "Can you make it to my cabin if I help you?" The Cherokee warrior looked at her with something approaching amazement. "You would help me after yesterday?" "Yesterday you were my enemy," Sarah said simply. "Today you're a wounded man who needs help. My mother taught me there's a difference." With considerable effort, she managed to help him to his feet and half carry, half drag him to her cabin. Her father was still at the settlement center, discussing defensive strategies with the other men, which gave her the opportunity to get the Cherokee warrior inside without immediate discovery. She settled him on her mother's old bed, then began assessing his wounds by lamplight. He had taken at least 2 musket balls, one in his side that appeared to have passed through without hitting vital organs, and another in his left shoulder that would need to be removed. Both wounds were serious, but not necessarily fatal if treated properly. "What's your name?" she asked, as she gathered her medical supplies, items her mother had taught her to use during the frequent accidents and illnesses that plagued frontier life. "Jonathan," he replied, then seemed to catch himself. Among his own people he would be called Runs Like Wolf, but he had learned early to use his English name when dealing with white settlers. "Jonathan Bearfield. I'm Sarah Mitchell. This is going to hurt, but I need to clean these wounds and get that ball out of your shoulder." Jonathan Bearfield nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Do what you must." As Sarah worked, cleaning and bandaging his wounds with the methodical care her mother had taught her, she learned pieces of his story. He had been part of a Cherokee hunting party that had encountered a militia patrol 2 days prior. The fighting had been brief but fierce, and Jonathan had been separated from his companions while wounded. eventually making his way toward the settlement in search of water and shelter. "Why didn't you go back to your own people?" Sarah asked, as she carefully probed for the musket ball in his shoulder. "Too far," Jonathan gasped as her probe found the lead ball. "Lost too much blood. Wouldn't have made it." "And you thought a white settlement would be safer?" Despite his pain, Jonathan managed a weak smile. Desperate men make desperate choices. The musket ball came out cleanly, and Sarah was able to clean and bandage both wounds properly. By the time she finished, Jonathan had lost consciousness from pain and blood loss, giving her time to consider what she had done and what it might mean for both of them. She had just provided aid and comfort to an enemy warrior who had likely participated in the attack on their settlement the day before. If discovered, her actions could be seen as treason by her neighbors, who were already on edge and ready to fight. Her father, despite his generally fair-minded nature, would be hard-pressed to understand why she had risked their safety for a Cherokee warrior, but she had also potentially saved a life, and something about Jonathan Bearfield suggested he was more than just a simple raider. His English was too good, his manner too composed, for him to be an ordinary warrior. There was intelligence in his eyes, and a dignity in his bearing that spoke of education and leadership. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself checking on him, frequently while maintaining the pretense of normal activities. Her father returned for the midday meal, and she served him quietly, all the while acutely aware of the unconscious Cherokee warrior lying in the next room. "You seem nervous, daughter," William observed as she fumbled with the coffee pot. "Something troubling you?" "Just thinking about James," Sarah replied, which was partially true. She was worried about her brother, though that wasn't the primary source of her current anxiety. "He's a smart boy," William said reassuringly. "Knows these woods better than most Cherokee. He'll make it home when it's safe." That evening, Jonathan regained consciousness. Sarah brought him water and some thin broth, which he accepted gratefully. "Why?" he asked simply, his dark eyes studying her face. "Why risk helping me?" Sarah considered the question as she helped him sit up to drink. "My mother used to say that we're all just people trying to make our way in a difficult world. She believed that kindness was never wasted, even when it seemed foolish." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was. Died 3 years ago from consumption." Jonathan nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry for your loss. My own mother died when I was young, killed by white soldiers who burned our village." The statement hung in the air between them, a reminder of the broader conflict that had brought them to this moment. Sarah realized that they were both products of the violence that had been tearing the frontier apart for decades. Yet here they were, enemy and healer, sharing a moment of human connection. "The men who killed your mother," Sarah said carefully, "they weren't from this settlement." "No," Jonathan agreed. "Just as the warriors who attacked your settlement yesterday weren't acting on my orders." The implications of that statement hit Sarah immediately. "Your orders?" Jonathan met her gaze steadily. "I am what you would call a war chief. My English name is Jonathan Bearfield, but among my people, I am known as Runs like Wolf. I lead a band of warriors who fight to protect Cherokee lands from encroachment." Sarah felt her world shift slightly. She had saved not just an enemy warrior, but an enemy leader, someone who might be responsible for planning attacks against settlements like hers. Yet looking at him now, wounded and vulnerable, she found it hard to reconcile the man before her with the image of a ruthless war chief. "Are you planning to attack us again?" she asked bluntly. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "That depends on many things. Whether your people continue to push into our hunting grounds, whether the government in Nashville honors its treaties, whether men like Red Eagle convince enough warriors that all whites must be driven out or killed." Red Eagle? Another war chief, more aggressive in his methods than I am. He believes there can be no peace between our peoples, that one must destroy the other for either to survive. Sarah absorbed this information, understanding that she was receiving intelligence that could be valuable to Captain Reynolds and the militia. Yet something held her back from viewing Jonathan purely as a source of military information. "And what do you believe?" she asked. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably, wincing as the movement pulled at his bandages. "I believe that we are all trapped in a situation that seems to have no good solutions. White settlers need land to farm and build their lives. Cherokee need the same land for hunting and maintaining our way of life. Both sides have legitimate needs, but the land cannot serve both purposes. So what's the answer?" "I don't know," Jonathan admitted. "Wiser men than I have tried to find one. Treaties get made and broken, boundaries get drawn and crossed, people on both sides die, and their deaths demand vengeance, which leads to more deaths." As night fell, Sarah found herself in an increasingly complex situation. Jonathan's wounds were healing, but he was still too weak to travel. Each hour he remained in her cabin increased the risk of discovery, yet she couldn't in good conscience send him away to die in the wilderness. Moreover, she was beginning to understand that Jonathan Bearfield was not the savage warrior she had been raised to fear. He was educated, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely troubled by the cycle of violence that had consumed the frontier. His presence challenged many of her assumptions about Cherokee and their motivations. "My father and the other men are planning to strengthen our defenses," she told him as she changed his bandages. "They expect another attack soon." "They're probably right," Jonathan said. "Red Eagle has been gathering warriors from several tribes. He's planning something significant. Will you be part of it?" Jonathan looked at her with eyes that seemed older than his years. "That depends on whether I survive long enough to rejoin my people, and on what I decide about the wisdom of Red Eagle's path." "What do you mean?" "Seeing you, talking with you, it reminds me that not all whites are the same, just as not all Cherokee are the same. Perhaps there are still possibilities for understanding, even peace, that men like Red Eagle refuse to consider." Sarah felt a flutter of something she couldn't quite identify. Hope, perhaps, or the dangerous beginning of trust. "Do you really believe that?" "I want to," Jonathan replied simply. "But wanting something and being able to achieve it are very different things." That night, Sarah lay awake again, but this time her thoughts were not just about the external threats facing their settlement. She was beginning to realize that her decision to help Jonathan Bearfield had set in motion forces she couldn't control or predict. She had crossed a line that few people in her position would even consider crossing, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Outside her cabin, the autumn wind moved through the trees with a sound like whispered warnings, and Sarah Mitchell wondered if she had just made the best decision of her life or the worst. The third day of Jonathan's recovery brought unexpected complications. Sarah was preparing his morning meal when she heard her father's voice outside, accompanied by another man she didn't recognize. Through the window she could see William Mitchell talking with a stranger, a Cherokee man, but dressed in a mixture of traditional and white clothing that marked him as someone who moved between both worlds. "Sarah," her father called. "Come, out here. We have a visitor." Her heart nearly stopped. If this Cherokee man was looking for Jonathan, her secret would be exposed in the most dangerous way possible. She glanced toward the bedroom where Jonathan lay, now alert and listening to the voices outside. "Hide under the bed," she whispered urgently. "Don't make a sound." Jonathan nodded, his face grim with understanding. Despite his improving condition, the effort of moving silently to the floor and crawling under the bed reopened one of his wounds, leaving small spots of blood on the wooden planks. Sarah quickly threw a quilt over the bloodstains and stepped outside, trying to appear calm and curious rather than terrified. The Cherokee visitor was a man of perhaps 40 years, with graying hair braided with silver ornaments and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of their surroundings. He wore buckskin leggings, a white cotton shirt, and a blue military-style coat that had seen better days. "Sarah, this is Daniel Ridge," her father said. "He's a Cherokee interpreter who works with the Indian Agency in Nashville. He's looking for information about a missing warrior." Daniel Ridge studied Sarah with the kind of attention that made her feel as though he could see right through her. "Miss Mitchell," he said in perfect English, "I'm seeking a man called Runs Like Wolf, known to whites as Jonathan Bearfield. He was separated from his companions during a skirmish with militia. 2 days ago. His family is concerned for his welfare." Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze steadily, though her heart was racing. "I haven't seen any Cherokee warriors since the attack on our settlement. Why would you think he might be here?" "Blood trail leads this direction," Ridge replied simply. "He was wounded and would need shelter, food, and medical attention. Your settlement is the only source of such things for many miles." William Mitchell frowned. "Are you suggesting we're harboring enemy warriors? Because I can assure you—" "I'm not making accusations," Ridge interrupted politely. "I'm simply following where the evidence leads. Jonathan Bearfield is not just any warrior. He's the son of a Cherokee chief and a leader in his own right. His people want him back, alive if possible." "And if he's dead?" Sarah asked, surprised by her own boldness. Ridge's expression darkened slightly. "Then his death will need to be avenged according to Cherokee law. Blood calls for blood, Miss Mitchell. It's a very old law, and one that has caused much trouble between our peoples." The implication was clear. If Jonathan had died while in the care of white settlers, there would be retaliation. Sarah realized that her decision to help him might have inadvertently protected her entire settlement, at least temporarily. "We'll keep our eyes open," William said diplomatically. "If we see any sign of this Bearfield fellow, we'll send word to the Indian Agency." Ridge nodded, but his attention remained focused on Sarah. "You have medical training, Miss Mitchell?" "This is yes." Question caught her off guard. "Some. My mother taught me basic healing before she passed." "Cherokee warriors are taught to endure pain without complaint," Ridge continued conversationally. "But even the strongest man needs proper care when badly wounded. A woman with medical knowledge would be valuable in such a situation." Sarah felt sweat beading on her forehead, despite the cool autumn air. "I suppose that's true." Ridge appeared to reach some internal conclusion. "I'll be staying in the area for a few more days, continuing my search. Perhaps I'll visit again, see if any new information comes to light." After Ridge departed, William Mitchell turned to his daughter with a puzzled expression. "Something about that conversation felt off. He seemed more interested in you than in searching the actual area where a wounded man might be hiding." "Maybe he's just being thorough," Sarah suggested, though she shared her father's unease. "Maybe, but Cherokee don't usually send interpreters to look for missing warriors. They send other warriors. Makes me wonder what's really going on here." That afternoon, while her father was helping to repair Brennan's damaged fence, Sarah filled Jonathan in on the morning's visitor. "Daniel Ridge," Jonathan said thoughtfully. "I know him. He's what you might call a diplomat, someone who tries to prevent wars rather than fight them. If he's looking for me personally, it means the situation is more serious than I thought." "What do you mean?" Jonathan struggled to sit up, his face pale but determined. "Ridge wouldn't come alone unless he was trying to prevent something catastrophic. My disappearance must have convinced someone, probably Red Eagle, that I was killed by white settlers. If that's true, he'll use my supposed death as justification for a major attack." Sarah felt cold dread settle in her stomach. How major? Red Eagle has been trying to unite several Cherokee factions into a single warband. He's been arguing that only through overwhelming force can we reclaim our lands. My death would give him the emotional leverage he needs to convince reluctant warriors to join his cause. But you're not dead. No, but I'm also not able to return to my people and tell them I'm alive. As long as I'm missing, Red Eagle can claim whatever he wants about my fate. Sarah began to understand the impossible position they were in. If I let you go now in your condition, you might die trying to reach your people. But if you stay here and you're discovered, it could mean war. And if Ridge determines that you're hiding me, Jonathan added grimly, it could mean your death. Cherokee justice is swift and final when it comes to protecting our leaders. Ridge suspects, doesn't he? Almost certainly. He's too experienced not to recognize the signs, but he's also cautious. He won't act without proof because the consequences of being wrong are too severe. That evening brought another complication. James Mitchell finally returned home, appearing at their cabin door just as Sarah was preparing supper. Her 19-year-old brother was exhausted, dirty, and sporting several cuts and bruises, but alive and unharmed. "James," Sarah embraced him with relief. "We were so worried. Where have you been?" "Hiding in the caves up on Copper Ridge," James replied, accepting a cup of coffee gratefully. "I heard the attack start and knew I couldn't make it back without running into Cherokee war parties. Figured it was safer to wait them out." William Mitchell clapped his son on the shoulder. "Smart thinking. See anything useful while you were up there?" James nodded grimly. "Cherokee camp, about 5 miles north of here, in the valley below Hawk's Nest. Maybe 30 warriors, all painted for war. They've got a white prisoner, too. Looked like one of the Miller boys from the next valley." "Over." Sarah's blood ran cold. If there was a Cherokee war camp that close, and if they had taken prisoners, the situation was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. "Did you recognize any of them?" William asked. "One of them. Yeah. Big fellow with a red handprint painted on his chest. I've seen him before at the trading post in Franklin. They call him Red Eagle." Jonathan, listening from the next room, would have recognized the description immediately. Red Eagle was indeed gathering his forces, and he was close enough to strike. "At Millbrook Hollow, with little warning. We need to get word to Captain Reynolds," William decided. "If Red Eagle's got 30 warriors in the area, we can't defend against that kind of force." "I can ride to Franklin tonight," James offered. "Take the old deer trail through the hills. Should be able to avoid any Cherokee scouts." As they made plans for James's ride to Franklin, Sarah realized that time was running out. Jonathan's presence in her cabin was becoming more dangerous by the hour, but he was still too weak to travel far. She needed to make a decision soon, one that could determine not just their individual fates, but the fate of everyone in the settlement. After her father and brother retired for the night, Sarah sat beside Jonathan's bed and shared what James had reported about Red Eagle's camp. 30 warriors, Jonathan mused. "That's enough to overrun your settlement easily, but not enough for the major campaign Red Eagle has been planning. He must be waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" "Proof of my death, probably. Or possibly reinforcements from other Cherokee bands. Ridge's presence suggests that not all Cherokee leaders support Red Eagle's plans. There may still be those arguing for peaceful solutions." Sarah made an impulsive decision. "What if you could get a message to Ridge? Let him know you're alive?" Jonathan considered this carefully. "It's possible, but it would require trusting him completely, and trust is a dangerous commodity in times like these. More dangerous than letting Red Eagle believe you're dead?" "No," Jonathan admitted. "You're right. If Ridge is here trying to prevent a war, then he needs to know I'm alive. The question is how to contact him without exposing you to danger." They spent the next hour developing a plan. Sarah would find a way to speak with Ridge privately, give him a coded message that would let him know Jonathan was alive and safe, and arrange for a secret meeting. It was risky, but less risky than allowing the current situation to continue. The opportunity came the next morning when Ridge returned to the settlement, ostensibly to continue his search, but actually to observe the settlers' behavior more closely. Sarah approached him while he was examining tracks near the forest edge. "Mr. Ridge," she said quietly, "I may have some information about the man you're looking for." Ridge straightened immediately, his eyes sharp with interest. "What kind of information, Miss Mitchell?" "The kind that might prevent unnecessary bloodshed," Sarah replied carefully. "But it would need to be shared privately, away from the settlement." Ridge studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks. "There's an old hunting cabin about a mile upstream. Do you know it?" Sarah nodded. She had played there as a child before the Cherokee troubles began. "Meet me there at sunset," Ridge said. "Come alone and be certain you're not followed." The rest of the day passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah went through the motions of normal activities while her mind raced with possibilities and fears. She was about to trust a Cherokee diplomat with not only her own life, but Jonathan's life and potentially the safety of her entire settlement. As evening approached, she made her excuses to her father and brother, claiming she needed to check on some medicinal herbs she had been drying in a shed near the creek. The lie came easily, but it left a bitter taste in her mouth. Another small betrayal in a situation that seemed to demand nothing but betrayals. The hunting cabin was exactly where she remembered it, though years of abandonment had left it weathered and partially overgrown with vines. Ridge was already there when she arrived, standing in the shadows near the doorway like a man accustomed to dangerous meetings. "You have news of Jonathan Bearfield," he said without preamble. "He's alive," Sarah replied simply. "Wounded, but recovering." Ridge's relief was visible, though he tried to hide it. "Where?" "Safe, hidden, being cared for." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "The question is, what happens next?" "What do you mean? You're here to prevent a war, aren't you?" "Jonathan told me about Red Eagle, about how his disappearance might be used to justify attacks on white settlements." Ridge nodded slowly. "Red Eagle has convinced many warriors that Jonathan was murdered by white settlers. He's using this as proof that no Cherokee is safe while whites remain in Cherokee territory. But Jonathan wasn't murdered. He was helped, healed, and protected by you. It wasn't a question, and Sarah didn't bother to deny it." "Yes? Do you understand what you've done?" Ridge asked, his voice serious but not accusatory. "You've saved the life of a Cherokee war chief, probably prevented a massacre, and put yourself in mortal danger all at the same time." "I understand." "That I helped a wounded man who needed help," Sarah replied. "Everything else was a consequence of that choice." Ridge was quiet for several minutes, apparently lost in thought. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of difficult decisions. "Red Eagle plans to attack your settlement tomorrow at dawn. He believes Jonathan's death needs to be avenged, and he's chosen your people as the target. I came here hoping to find proof that Jonathan was still alive, something that might stop the attack." Sarah's heart pounded. "And now you have that proof." "Yes, but having it and being able to use it are different things. If I simply tell Red Eagle that Jonathan is alive and being hidden by white settlers, he'll demand to know where. When he learns you've been harboring him, Cherokee law will demand punishment." "What kind of punishment?" Ridge's expression was grim. "Death, most likely. You've interfered in Cherokee affairs, hidden a Cherokee leader, and prevented his people from knowing his fate. By our laws, these are serious crimes." Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "So saving his life was actually a crime? According to Cherokee law, yes. According to moral law." Ridge shrugged. "That's more complicated." "What are my options?" "Very few," Ridge admitted. "You could flee with your family tonight. Try to reach Franklin before the Red Eagle attacks. You could hope that Jonathan recovers quickly enough to return to his people and explain the situation himself. Or you could trust me to find a third option. but that would require taking risks that could get us all killed. Sarah looked out through the cabin's broken window at the forest, where Cherokee warriors were even now preparing for battle. Tomorrow at dawn, they would come for her settlement, her father, her brother, and everyone she cared about. The choice she had made to save one life might now cost dozens of others. "What's the third option?" she asked. Ridge leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We arrange for Jonathan to return to his people tonight, before the attack, but we do it in a way that makes it appear he escaped on his own, rather than being hidden and healed by whites." "How?" "You help him reach the edge of Cherokee territory. I find him there, apparently wounded and lost, but making his way home. He tells his people that he was injured, lost consciousness, and has been wandering in the forest for days, slowly recovering his strength." Sarah immediately saw the problems with this plan. He's still too weak to travel that far. And what about his wounds? They're obviously fresh and properly treated. The wounds we can explain as being reopened during his wandering. As for his strength, Ridge paused, that's where the real risk comes in. We'd essentially be gambling his life so that he can make the journey without collapsing or dying along the way. And if he doesn't make it, then Red Eagle attacks your settlement at dawn, just as planned, and Jonathan dies in the forest instead of in your cabin. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to think through the impossible mathematics of survival. Every choice seemed to lead to death. Jonathan's, her own, her family's, or her neighbor's. The act of mercy that had seemed so clear and simple 3 days ago had become a complex web of competing loyalties and deadly consequences. "There's something else you should know," Ridge continued. "Red Eagle isn't just planning to attack your settlement. He's planning to make an example of it. He wants other white communities to know what happens when Cherokee leaders disappear. He's not interested in a quick raid. He wants total destruction." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. How many people? Everyone, men, women, children. He believes that only through fear can he prevent further encroachment on Cherokee lands. Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly at Ridge. "And you? What do you believe?" "I believe that cycles of violence only create more violence," Ridge replied. "I believe that Cherokee and whites will have to find ways to live together, or we'll all end up destroying each other." "Then help me save Jonathan. Help me save my people. Help me prove that there's another way." Ridge was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the fading light. Finally, he nodded. "Meet me here again in 2 hours, after full dark. Bring Jonathan if he can travel, carry him if he can't. We'll try to save everyone, Cherokee and white alike." As Sarah made her way back to the settlement through the gathering darkness, she realized that she was about to embark on the most dangerous night of her life. But for the first time in days, she felt something approaching hope. The alternative, watching Red Eagle's warriors destroy everything she loved at sunrise, was simply unacceptable. She would risk everything to prevent it. The moon was a thin sliver when Sarah returned to her cabin, her mind racing with the implications of what she had agreed to do. 2 hours to prepare Jonathan for a journey that could kill him, through territory crawling with Cherokee warriors who would execute them both if discovered. The margin for error was non-existent. Inside, she found Jonathan sitting up in bed, having overheard enough of the earlier conversations to understand the gravity of their situation. His color was better, but dark circles under his eyes revealed the toll his injuries had taken. "You spoke with Ridge," he said. "It wasn't a question. We have a plan. It's dangerous, probably foolish, but it's the only chance we have." Sarah quickly outlined Ridge's proposal, watching Jonathan's expression grow more troubled with each detail. "Sarah, you don't understand what you're risking," he said when she finished. "Even if we succeed in making it appear that I escaped on my own, Red Eagle will be suspicious. He's not easily fooled, and he has scouts throughout these woods who know every trail, every hiding place. Do you have a better idea?" Jonathan was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. No. But I need you to understand something before we attempt this. If we're caught, Ridge might be able to claim diplomatic immunity. I might be able to argue that I was trying to return to my people. But there would be no protection for you. Cherokee justice is swift and final. Sarah moved to her mother's old medicine chest, gathering supplies for the journey. Then we won't get caught. It's not that simple. Red Eagle has been planning this attack for weeks. He has warriors positioned all around your settlement, watching for any sign of militia, reinforcements or attempts to escape. Moving through their lines will be like walking through a spider's web in the dark. Ridge knows these woods too. He'll find a way. Jonathan struggled to his feet, testing his strength. The effort left him pale and breathing hard, but he remained upright. I can travel, but not far and not fast. If we encounter resistance, we'll handle it when it happens. Sarah helped him into a dark shirt and jacket that would be less visible in the forest. Right now, we focus on what we can control. As they prepared to leave, Sarah wrote a brief note to her father, explaining that she had gone to gather medical supplies from a cache her mother had hidden in the forest. It was thin justification for her absence, but it might buy them time if her disappearance was discovered before dawn. The walk to the hunting cabin tested Jonathan's endurance to its limits. Sarah had to support him frequently, and they were forced to rest every few hundred yards. The journey that should have taken 20 minutes stretched to nearly an hour, and Sarah began to fear they wouldn't reach Ridge before he gave up waiting. But Ridge was still there when they arrived, crouched in the shadows beside the cabin, with the patience of a man accustomed to dangerous waiting. He took one look at Jonathan's condition and frowned. "He's weaker than I hoped," Ridge said quietly. "The journey to Cherokee territory is at least 5 miles through rough country." "I can make it," Jonathan insisted, though his labored breathing suggested otherwise. "Maybe. But can you make it while avoiding Red Eagle's scouts, and can you do it quickly enough to prevent the dawn attack?" Sarah realized there was another problem they hadn't fully considered. How do we know Red Eagle will call off the attack just because Jonathan returns? What if he's too committed to his plan to change course? Ridge's expression was grim. That's the biggest risk of all. Red Eagle has been using Jonathan's supposed death to rally warriors who were previously reluctant to attack settlements. If Jonathan suddenly reappears alive and well, it undermines Red Eagle's entire justification for war, which could make Red Eagle even more dangerous, Jonathan added. A leader who's been proven wrong in front of his warriors often becomes desperate to reassert his authority. They spent precious minutes debating alternatives, but kept returning to the same conclusion. Their original plan was still their best hope, despite its obvious flaws. Ridge would guide them through the forest using paths known only to Cherokee scouts, help Jonathan reach a point where he could be discovered making his way home, and then return to Red Eagle's camp with news of the miraculous survival. "There's one more thing," Ridge said as they prepared to depart. "We need a believable explanation for Jonathan's injuries and his recovery. The wounds are too clean, too well treated to pass for something a man would inflict on himself while lost in the forest." Sarah had been thinking about this problem as well. What if we say he was helped by a Cherokee woman, someone from a distant band who found him, treated his wounds, but couldn't get him all the way home? "It's possible," Ridge mused. "There are Cherokee settlements to the south that might be sympathetic, but it would have to be someone Red Eagle doesn't know personally." "What about Morning Star?" Jonathan suggested. "She's a healer from the Overhill towns. Red Eagle has heard of her but never met her. She's known for helping anyone who needs it, regardless of tribal politics." Ridge nodded slowly. "That could work. Morning Star has a reputation for independence that would make the story believable." With their cover story established, they set out into the forest, Ridge led the way, moving with the silent confidence of someone who had traveled these paths countless times. Sarah followed, helping support Jonathan when the terrain became difficult. The Cherokee war chief's determination was impressive, but Sarah could see the effort was costing him dearly. They had been traveling for perhaps an hour when Ridge suddenly stopped, holding up a hand for silence. In the distance, barely audible, came the sound of voices speaking in Cherokee. Ridge listened intently, then motioned for them to crouch behind a fallen log. "Scouts," he whispered, "3 of them moving along the ridge above us. They're checking the perimeter before the attack." Sarah's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the damp earth, acutely aware that discovery would mean death for all of them. The voices grew closer, and she could hear the soft sounds of moccasined feet moving through the underbrush. One of the scouts said something that made his companions laugh, and Sarah realized they were relaxed, confident. They weren't expecting to find anything unusual on their patrol. This was routine security, not an active search. The voices faded as the scouts continued their circuit, but Ridge waited several more minutes before indicating it was safe to move. "Red Eagle's being thorough," he observed quietly. "He's not taking any chances on surprise reinforcements arriving from Franklin." They resumed their journey, but now with the knowledge that Cherokee warriors were positioned throughout the forest. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Every sound might herald discovery. The tension was almost unbearable, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that dozens of lives hung in the balance. Jonathan's strength began to fail more noticeably as they climbed toward the higher ground where Ridge planned to stage their deception. Sarah could see him struggling not to collapse, his face pale with pain and exhaustion. She began to wonder if they were asking too much of him, if their plan would fail simply because he couldn't physically endure what they were demanding. "How? Much farther?" she whispered to Ridge during one of their rest stops. "Another mile, maybe less, but the terrain gets rougher from here." Sarah looked at Jonathan, who was leaning against a tree trunk with his eyes closed, gathering strength for the next stage of their journey. She made a decision that surprised even herself. "I'm going to carry him." Both men stared at her in astonishment. "Sarah, that's impossible," Jonathan protested. "I'm too heavy and you're—" "I'm stronger than I look," Sarah interrupted. "My father taught me to carry wounded men when I was 16. It's not about strength alone, it's about leverage and determination." Ridge looked skeptical but desperate enough to consider any option. "Even if you could manage it, the noise would be considerable. We need to move silently." "Then you'll have to find us a route that doesn't require stealth," Sarah replied. "Because Jonathan can't make another mile on his own, and we can't abandon the plan now." After a brief debate, Ridge agreed to modify their approach. Instead of following the most concealed paths, he would lead them along an old game trail that offered easier footing but greater exposure. It was a calculated risk, but one that seemed necessary given Jonathan's condition. Sarah's unconventional method of carrying Jonathan, essentially supporting him across her shoulders while he used his remaining strength to maintain balance, proved more effective than anyone had expected. They made better time than they had since leaving the cabin, though the physical demands on Sarah were enormous. "Why are you doing this?" Jonathan asked during one of their brief rest stops. "You've already risked everything to save my life. You could have stayed safely in your cabin and let events unfold as they would." Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead, considering the question. "Because stopping one attack isn't enough. If we succeed tonight, we might prevent this war from starting. If we fail, more people die on both sides, and the cycle of violence continues. You think one act of compassion can change the course of history? I think one act of compassion can inspire others. Maybe if Cherokee and White see that enemies can become allies, that healing is possible even in the midst of conflict, then maybe there's hope for lasting peace." Ridge, who had been listening to their conversation, shook his head. "You're both Idealists. This war isn't about personal hatred. It's about land, resources, survival. Those are practical problems that require practical solutions. And what's your practical solution? Sarah asked. Gradual separation. Clearly defined boundaries that both sides respect. Trade agreements that benefit everyone. Legal frameworks that prevent the kind of incidents that lead to cycles of revenge. That sounds reasonable, Jonathan said, but it requires trust, and trust is exactly what we don't have, which is why tonight matters so much, Sarah added. If we can demonstrate that Cherokee and whites can work together to prevent unnecessary violence, it might be the beginning of the trust we need. They reached their destination, just as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Ridge had chosen a small clearing beside a creek where Jonathan could be positioned to look as though he had collapsed while trying to reach water. The setting was perfect for their deception, but Sarah realized they had almost run out of time. Red Eagle's attack will begin within the hour, Ridge said urgently. I need to get back to his camp and discover Jonathan's survival. You need to return to your settlement and prepare for what comes next. What do you mean? Sarah asked. Even if we succeed in stopping the attack, Red Eagle won't simply give up his plans. He'll be suspicious of how Jonathan survived and recovered. So there will be questions, investigations. You'll need to be ready with answers. Jonathan, who was now positioned beside the creek and working to make himself appear as though he had been struggling through the wilderness for days, looked up at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. There's something else, he said quietly. If this works, if Red Eagle calls off the attack and I return to my people, it's unlikely we'll see each other again. The Cherokee Council will probably forbid contact with whites for some time, especially after this incident. Sarah felt an unexpected pang of loss. Over the past few days, Jonathan had become more than just a patient or a responsibility. He had become a symbol of possibility, proof that understanding between enemies was achievable. Maybe that's for the best, she said, though she didn't entirely believe it. At least you'll be alive, and your people will know the truth about what happened. And your people will be safe, Jonathan added. That's what matters most. Ridge was already moving toward the forest edge. I have to go. Sarah, give me 10 minutes to get clear, then start back to your settlement. Move quickly but carefully. There are still scouts in the area. As Ridge disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah found herself alone with Jonathan for what might be the last time. The moment felt significant, though she wasn't sure why. Thank you, Jonathan said simply, not just for saving my life, but for showing me that there are whites who see Cherokee as people rather than obstacles. And thank you for showing me that Cherokee leaders aren't the savages I was taught to fear. They looked at each other across the clearing, two people from different worlds who had found common ground in the most unlikely circumstances. Then Sarah turned and began the long, dangerous journey back to her settlement, carrying with her the hope that their night's work had prevented a massacre. Behind her, Jonathan settled back against a tree to wait for Ridge's return, preparing to play his part in the deception that might save both their peoples from a war that would benefit no one. The sun was rising, and with it came either salvation or disaster. They would know soon enough which it would be. Sarah's return journey to the settlement became a nightmare of stealth and endurance. The forest seemed alive with Cherokee warriors preparing for battle, their painted faces barely visible in the pre-dawn shadows. Twice she was forced to hide motionless for long minutes, while scouts passed within arm's reach, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain they would hear it. The sun was already painting the eastern horizon pink when she finally reached the edge of Millbrook Hollow. What she saw there made her blood freeze. Red Eagle's warriors had completely surrounded the settlement, positioned behind trees and earthworks they must have constructed during the night. At least 40 men, not the 30 James had reported. Red Eagle had gathered reinforcements. More terrifying still, the Cherokee warriors were in full battle regalia, their faces painted with symbols of death and war. This wasn't going to be a simple raid for supplies or horses. Red Eagle intended to make Millbrook Hollow an example that would be remembered for generations. Sarah worked her way around the perimeter, desperately searching for a way to reach her cabin without being detected. The Cherokee positions were expertly placed to prevent exactly what she was attempting. Any movement toward the settlement would expose her to multiple lines of sight. Then she heard it, a single eagle's cry from the forest behind the Cherokee lines. The signal had come from the direction where she had left Jonathan and Ridge. Her heart leaped with hope. It had to be Ridge, returning with news of Jonathan's survival. The effect on the Cherokee warriors was immediate and dramatic. Heads turned toward the sound, and she could see men beginning to move through the forest. Voices called out in Cherokee, urgent but not alarmed. Something was happening that required attention, but not immediate action. Sarah used the distraction to sprint across an open patch of ground to the back of the Brennan cabin. From there, she could see her own home, where smoke was already rising from the chimney. Her father was awake and probably wondering where she was. She was about to make another dash when a hand fell on her shoulder. Sarah spun around, expecting to face a Cherokee warrior, but instead found herself looking at Thomas Brennan, her neighbor. His face was grim, and he carried his rifle at ready. "Sarah Mitchell, what in God's name are you doing out here?" he whispered harshly. "The woods are crawling with Cherokee. I've been watching them position themselves all night." I went to check on something," Sarah stammered, realizing how inadequate her cover story sounded. "Check on what?" "There's nothing out there but death waiting to happen." Brennan studied her face suspiciously. "You look like you've been running through the forest all night. What aren't you telling me?" Before Sarah could answer, new sounds erupted from the Cherokee positions. She could hear animated discussions, the sound of men moving quickly through the underbrush, and then, unmistakably, the voice of someone giving orders in authoritative Cherokee. "Something's changed," Brennan observed, his grip tightening on his rifle. "They're not preparing to attack anymore. They're reorganizing." Sarah closed her eyes in relief. Ridge had found Jonathan, and was even now convincing Red Eagle that the Cherokee war chief was alive and had never been captured by whites. The plan was working. "We need to get to my father," Sarah said urgently. "If the Cherokee aren't attacking, there might be a chance to negotiate to prevent this from escalating further." Brennan looked at her as though she had lost her mind. "Negotiate? Sarah, these are Cherokee warriors painted for war. They didn't come here to talk." "People can change their minds when circumstances change," Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. They made their way carefully to Sarah's cabin, where they found William Mitchell and James standing at the window, watching the Cherokee positions with growing confusion. "They've stopped moving," William reported, when Sarah and Brennan arrived. "Been sitting still for the past 10 minutes, almost like they're waiting for orders." "Or waiting for news," Sarah added, earning sharp looks from all three men. "What kind of news?" James asked. Sarah realized she was walking a dangerous line. She couldn't reveal her role in recent events without exposing herself to accusations of treason, but she needed to prepare her family for what might come next. "Word travels fast in the forest," she said carefully. "Maybe they're waiting to hear from other war parties or from their leaders." "Cherokee don't usually hesitate once. They've committed to an attack," William observed. "Something's definitely changed." The answer came within the hour, in the form of Daniel Ridge, approaching the settlement under a white flag, improvised from a torn shirt tied to a long branch. He walked confidently across the open ground, apparently unafraid of the settlers. "Rifles, I need to speak with your leaders," Ridge called out when he was close enough to be heard clearly. "I bring news that affects all of us." William Mitchell and Thomas Brennan exchanged glances, then stepped out to meet the Cherokee diplomat. Sarah followed, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. "What news?" William asked bluntly. "The Cherokee warrior you were thought to have killed, Jonathan Bearfield, called Runs Like Wolf, has been found alive," Ridge announced. "He was not captured or murdered by whites, as Red Eagle believed. He has been wandering in the forest for days, slowly recovering from wounds received in battle with militia." Sarah watched her father's face carefully, looking for any sign that he suspected her involvement. William's expression showed surprise and relief, but no suspicion. "That's good news, I suppose," William said carefully. "Does this mean the attack is called off? Red Eagle is reconsidering his plans," Ridge replied diplomatically. "The discovery of Jonathan Bearfield alive removes his primary justification for war. However, there are still complications." "What kind of complications?" Ridge glanced around at the assembled settlers as though weighing how much to reveal. "Jonathan Bearfield claims he was helped during his recovery by a Cherokee woman from the southern settlements. However, some of his injuries show signs of treatment that would be unusual for traditional Cherokee healing methods." Sarah felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool morning air. This was the critical moment. If Red Eagle's suspicions were aroused, their deception could still unravel catastrophically. "What does that mean for us?" Brennan asked. "Red Eagle wants to question some of your people," Ridge explained. "Particularly anyone with medical knowledge who might have encountered Cherokee in the past few days." All eyes turned to Sarah, and she felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. This was exactly what she had feared. Being singled out for interrogation by Cherokee warriors who would show no mercy if they discovered the truth. "I suppose that would be me," Sarah said, working to keep her voice steady. "I'm the only one here with significant medical training." "Sarah, no," William said immediately. "I won't have my daughter questioned by Cherokee warriors. They can't be trusted to honor safe conduct." "I guarantee her safety personally," Ridge said solemnly. "She will be questioned, allowed to answer, and returned unharmed, regardless of what she says." "And if we refuse?" James asked, his hand moving to his rifle. Ridge's expression hardened slightly. "Then Red Eagle will assume you have something to hide, and the attack will proceed as originally planned." The ultimatum was clear. Sarah would submit to Cherokee interrogation, or everyone in the settlement would die. It wasn't really a choice at all. "I'll go," Sarah said before her father could object again, "but I want witnesses. Mr. Ridge, and another Cherokee of his choosing, no more." "Agreed," Ridge nodded. "The questioning will take place in neutral ground, the old trading post at Miller's Creek. Jonathan Bearfield himself will conduct the interrogation." Sarah's heart leaped at this news. If Jonathan was well enough to participate in the questioning, it meant their plan had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. More importantly, she would be facing someone who knew the truth and would have no interest in exposing her role in his survival. "When?" William asked grimly. "Within the hour," Ridge replied. "Red Eagle is impatient for answers." As Ridge departed to make arrangements, Sarah found herself surrounded by her worried family and neighbors. Everyone had questions, advice, and fears about what the Cherokee might do to her. "Just tell them the truth," William advised. "You've done nothing wrong. You've been here in the settlement tending to normal duties. They have no reason to suspect you of anything." If only it were that simple, Sarah thought. The truth was exactly what she couldn't tell them. Thomas Brennan had a different perspective. "Don't tell them anything more than you have to," he counseled. "Cherokee can twist words, make innocent statements sound like confessions." "What if they try to force answers from you?" James asked, his young face creased with worry. "They won't," Sarah replied with more confidence than she felt. "Ridge guaranteed my safety, and he seems to be a man of honor." What she didn't say was that her real protection would come from Jonathan himself. As long as he was present during the questioning, she should be safe from any real harm. The journey to Miller's Creek took place under heavy Cherokee escort. Sarah rode her father's mare, while armed warriors flanked her on all sides, their painted faces impassive but watchful. Ridge rode beside her, maintaining conversation to help ease the tension. "Jonathan Bearfield is recovering well," Ridge mentioned casually. "Stronger than anyone expected, given his ordeal in the wilderness." "That's good to hear," Sarah replied carefully, aware that every word was being listened to and evaluated. "He speaks highly of Cherokee healing methods," Ridge continued. "Says traditional remedies are more effective than many people realize." Sarah understood that Ridge was coaching her, providing details that would support their cover story if questions arose about Jonathan's rapid recovery. Miller's Creek trading post had been abandoned for 2 years, but it provided neutral ground, where Cherokee and whites had once conducted business peacefully. The log building was weathered but sound, and it offered privacy for sensitive discussions. Inside, Sarah found Jonathan waiting, along with another Cherokee man she didn't recognize. A huge warrior with intricate tattoos covering his arms and chest. This had to be Red Eagle himself. Jonathan looked remarkably well, considering his condition just hours before. The rest and medical attention had clearly helped, but Sarah suspected he was also drawing on reserves of strength to project confidence and authority. "Miss Mitchell," Jonathan said formally, his voice giving no hint of their previous relationship, "thank you for agreeing to answer our questions." Red Eagle studied Sarah with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. When he spoke, his English was accented but perfectly clear. "You are the healer in your settlement," he said. "It wasn't a question. I have some medical knowledge, yes," Sarah replied. "My mother taught me basic healing before she died." "In the past week, have you treated any Cherokee warriors?" The critical question, asked directly and without preamble. Sarah met Red Eagle's gaze steadily. "No," she said simply. "I've treated no Cherokee. Have you seen any Cherokee near your settlement other than during the raid 5 days ago?" "No." Red Eagle's eyes narrowed. "My friend here," he gestured toward Jonathan, "was found this morning recovering from serious wounds. His injuries show signs of careful treatment, clean bandages, proper wound care, medicines not typically available in the wilderness." Sarah forced herself to remain calm. "I'm glad he's recovering well. He claims to have been helped by a Cherokee woman from the southern settlements," Red Eagle continued, "a healer named Morning Star. Do you know of this woman?" "I've heard the name, but I've never met her," Sarah replied truthfully. Jonathan spoke for the first time since the initial greeting. "Morning Star is known for her skills with traditional remedies. She apparently found me collapsed near a stream and treated my wounds using Cherokee methods." "Yet your recovery seems remarkably swift," Red Eagle observed, his suspicion evident. "Cherokee healing can be very effective," Jonathan replied calmly, "and I am strong. My body heals quickly when properly treated." Red Eagle turned his attention back to Sarah. "If Morning Star brought my friend to health using Cherokee methods, there should be signs of traditional treatments, specific herbs, particular types of bandaging, ritual scarification to prevent infection." Sarah's heart began to race. This was exactly the kind of detail that could expose their deception. But Jonathan was ready with an answer. "Morning Star is known for adapting traditional methods to individual needs," he said smoothly. "She often incorporates techniques she has learned from contact with white traders and missionaries." Red Eagle's frustration was becoming visible. "Very convenient," he said with barely concealed skepticism. "Are you questioning my word?" Jonathan asked, his voice carrying a subtle warning. The tension in the room ratcheted upward. Sarah realized she was witnessing a confrontation between two Cherokee leaders with very different philosophies about how to deal with white settlers. "I question the timing and circumstances of your recovery," Red Eagle replied carefully. "It seems remarkably fortunate that you should be found alive just as I was preparing to avenge your death." Fortune favors those who refuse to give up, Jonathan countered. I survived because I was determined to return to my people and prevent unnecessary bloodshed, or because you received help from whites and now seek to protect them from the consequences of their interference. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Sarah realized that Red Eagle suspected the truth or something close to it, but couldn't prove his suspicions without calling Jonathan a liar. Jonathan's response was swift and decisive. Are you accusing me of dishonor, of betraying my people? For white sympathy, Red Eagle stepped back slightly, recognizing that he had pushed too far. To directly accuse Jonathan of treachery would require proof he didn't possess, and would likely split the Cherokee warriors into opposing factions. I accuse no one, Red Eagle said carefully. I simply seek the truth. The truth is that I am alive, that no whites killed me, and that your justification for attacking innocent settlers no longer exists, Jonathan replied firmly. Unless you have other reasons for war that you haven't shared. Red Eagle's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Ridge spoke into the silence. Perhaps we can all agree that the most important thing is preventing unnecessary bloodshed. Jonathan? Bearfield is alive and well. The settlers of Millbrook Hollow had nothing to do with his injuries or his recovery. There is no reason for war. Red Eagle looked from Jonathan to Sarah to Ridge, clearly struggling with competing impulses. Finally, he gave a curt nod. The attack is cancelled, he announced. My warriors will withdraw from the area, but this matter is not closed. If I discover that Cherokee have been harbored by whites, if I find evidence of deception, there will be consequences. As the Cherokee leaders filed out of the trading post, Jonathan paused beside Sarah. You answered well, he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. Morning Star would be proud of your discretion. Then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with the knowledge that their desperate gamble had succeeded. The settlement was safe. Jonathan was alive and free, and the immediate threat of war had been averted. But Red Eagle's parting words echoed in her mind. This matter is not closed. Sarah Mitchell had saved lives and prevented a massacre, but she had also made a powerful enemy. The Cherokee war chief would be watching, waiting for any sign that his suspicions were justified. The price of mercy, she was learning, was eternal vigilance. 3 weeks passed in deceptive quiet after Red Eagle's warriors withdrew from Millbrook Hollow. The settlement gradually returned to its normal rhythms. Farmers tended their late harvest, children played in the yards, and women gathered to share news and gossip. But Sarah Mitchell found no peace in this apparent calm. She knew Red Eagle was still out there, still suspicious, still searching for proof that his instincts about Jonathan's rescue had been correct. Every stranger who passed through the settlement, every unusual sound from the forest, every Cherokee sighting reported by travelers made her heart race with the fear that discovery was imminent. The psychological toll was wearing her down. She found herself jumping at shadows, losing sleep, making excuses to avoid social gatherings where her nervous behavior might be noticed. Her father attributed her anxiety to the recent Cherokee threat, but James was beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about her increasingly erratic conduct. "Sarah, you're wound up tighter than a clock spring," he observed one evening as she dropped a plate while serving supper. "The Cherokee are gone. We're safe now." "Are we?" Sarah asked, more sharply than she intended. Red Eagle made it clear he wasn't finished with us. William Mitchell looked up from his meal with concern. "Daughter, you can't live your life in constant fear of what might happen. We faced the threat, we survived it, and now we move forward." But Sarah couldn't move. Forward! Every day that passed without discovery felt like borrowed time, and she found herself wondering if it might be better to confess everything rather than live with the constant anxiety of waiting for exposure. Her internal struggle was complicated by dreams, vivid, recurring dreams about Jonathan. Sometimes she dreamed of their conversations in her cabin, his thoughtful questions about the possibility of peace between their peoples. Other times she dreamed of carrying him through the forest, feeling the weight of his trust and the burden of his survival. Most disturbing were the dreams where Cherokee warriors surrounded her cabin at dawn, demanding to know where she had hidden their war chief. In these nightmares, Red Eagle himself would step forward, his face painted for death, and pronounce sentences for her crimes against the Cherokee nation. Sarah always woke from these dreams, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding, needing several minutes to convince herself that she was safe in her own bed. The strain was beginning to show in other ways as well. Her appetite disappeared. Her hands developed a slight tremor that made delicate tasks difficult, and she found herself snapping at neighbors and family members over trivial matters. Thomas Brennan noticed the changes during a visit to discuss winter preparations. "Sarah, you look like you haven't slept in a week," he said bluntly. "Are you sick?" "Just tired," Sarah replied, trying to deflect his concern. "Maybe you should see the doctor in Franklin," Brennan suggested. "Could be your nerves need some kind of tonic." The irony of the suggestion wasn't lost on Sarah. She was the closest thing to a doctor their settlement had, and now she was being advised to seek medical attention for problems caused by her own medical intervention. "I'll be fine," she insisted, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Her isolation deepened when a letter arrived from her cousin Margaret in Nashville, asking Sarah to come for an extended visit during the winter months. The invitation was tempting. A chance to escape the constant reminders of her secret, to be around people who knew nothing about Cherokee raids or missing war chiefs. But leaving would mean abandoning her father and brother during the most vulnerable season of the year. Winter on the frontier was dangerous enough without Cherokee threats. Settlers needed to depend on each other for survival. More importantly, Sarah realized she couldn't run from what she had done. The guilt and fear would follow her to Nashville, or anywhere else she might go. She had made choices that bound her to this place and these consequences. The first snow fell in early November, bringing with it a new set of concerns. Winter weather would make Cherokee raids less likely, but it would also make communication and travel more difficult. If Red Eagle decided to act on his suspicions, help from Franklin or other settlements would be slow in coming. Sarah was splitting firewood behind her cabin when she saw the lone rider approaching from the south. Her heart immediately began racing. Solitary travelers were rare in winter, and this rider's posture suggested urgency. As the figure drew closer, Sarah recognized him with a mixture of relief and apprehension. It was Daniel Ridge, the Cherokee diplomat who had helped orchestrate Jonathan's supposed rescue. Ridge dismounted near her cabin and approached with the careful demeanor of someone bearing serious news. "Miss Mitchell," he said formally, glancing around to ensure they weren't being observed. "I need to speak with you privately." Sarah set down her axe and wiped her hands on her apron, trying to appear calm, despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. "Of course. Would you like to come inside? That might be best." Inside the cabin, Ridge accepted a cup of coffee, but didn't drink it, instead holding it between his hands as though seeking warmth from the ceramic. "There have been developments," he said without preamble. "Red Eagle hasn't abandoned his suspicions about Jonathan's recovery. He's been asking questions, investigating the story we constructed." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What kind of questions?" "He sent warriors to the southern settlements to find Morning Star, the healer we claimed treated Jonathan's wounds. And?" Ridge's expression was grim. "Morning Star is real, and she is indeed known for her healing skills. But she's also been living with her sister's family for the past month, helping with a difficult childbirth. There are dozens of witnesses who can confirm she never left the settlement during the time Jonathan was supposedly in her care." The room seemed to spin around Sarah. Their carefully constructed deception was unraveling, and when it collapsed completely, it would bring death not just to her, but potentially to everyone in Millbrook Hollow. "How long before Red Eagle puts this together?" she asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "He may already have done so," Ridge replied. "I came here as soon as I learned about his investigation, but I may be too late." Sarah sank into a chair, the full weight of her situation finally hitting her. She had saved Jonathan's life and prevented one massacre, but in doing so, she had set in motion events that might lead to an even greater tragedy. "What are my options?" she asked quietly. Ridge was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with the answer. "Very few," he admitted finally. "You could flee, take your family, and disappear into the wilderness, try to reach a larger settlement where Cherokee law couldn't touch you, and abandon everyone else in Millbrook Hollow to face Red Eagle's wrath. Or you could confess everything to Red Eagle himself, throw yourself on his mercy, and hope that he values honesty enough to limit his retaliation." Sarah almost laughed at the suggestion. "Red Eagle doesn't strike me as a merciful man." "No," Ridge agreed. "He's not, but he is a practical one. Mass slaughter of white settlers would bring military retaliation from Nashville. He might settle for symbolic justice, meaning my death. Possibly." Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered settlement where her neighbors were going about their daily routines, unaware that their lives hung in the balance because of her actions. "There's a third option," Ridge said carefully, "though it's the most dangerous of all." "What?" "We could arrange for you to meet with Jonathan directly. If he spoke on your behalf, if he publicly acknowledged that you saved his life and argued for clemency, would Red Eagle listen to him?" "Jonathan carries significant influence among Cherokee leaders. His voice might be enough to save your life, though it would likely cost him his position and possibly his own safety." Sarah turned from the window to face Ridge. "I won't ask him to sacrifice himself for my mistakes." "It might not be your choice to make," Ridge replied. "Jonathan feels responsible for the situation you're in. When he learns about the Red Eagle's investigation, and he will learn about it, he may decide to act regardless of your wishes." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching horses reached them from outside. Ridge immediately moved to the window, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife at his belt. "Cherokee riders," he reported tersely. "4 of them, moving fast." Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. After weeks of fear and uncertainty, the moment of truth had finally arrived. Whatever was about to happen, at least the waiting would be over. "Should I hide?" she asked. Ridge shook his head. "Too late for that. Besides, running now would only confirm their suspicions." The riders pulled up outside Sarah's cabin with military precision. Through the window, she could see they were all warriors she didn't recognize, their faces painted in patterns that suggested they were on official business rather than a war party. One of them dismounted and approached the cabin door. His knock was firm, but not threatening, the sound of someone with authority who expected to be answered promptly. Sarah opened the door to find herself facing a Cherokee warrior of perhaps 30 years, tall and lean with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her appearance. "Miss Sarah Mitchell?" he asked in careful English. "Yes. I am Swift Arrow, messenger for War Chief Red Eagle. You are to come with us immediately." Sarah's mouth went dry. "Where?" "To answer for crimes against the Cherokee Nation." Ridge appeared beside Sarah in the doorway. "I am Daniel Ridge, official interpreter for the Cherokee Council," he announced. "This woman is under my protection as a witness in tribal matters." Swift Arrow's expression didn't change. "Your protection has been revoked by higher authority. The woman will come with us now. I demand to know the specific charges against her." Ridge insisted, harboring enemies of the Cherokee people, interfering in tribal justice. Deception regarding the fate of Cherokee leaders. Swift Arrow's voice was flat, official. Red Eagle will hear her confession at the council fire tonight. Sarah realized that her secret was fully exposed. Somehow, Red Eagle had gathered enough evidence to move against her directly, bypassing any pretense of investigation or negotiation. "I'll need to inform my family," Sarah said, working to keep her voice steady. "No," Swift Arrow replied firmly. "You come now, alone. Your family will learn your fate when Red Eagle decides their fate as well." The threat to her father and brother galvanized Sarah in a way that threats to herself had not. "My family had nothing to do with this. If you have charges against me, fine, but leave them out of it. That will be Red Eagle's decision, not mine." Ridge stepped forward. "I demand the right to accompany her as official interpreter and advocate." Swift Arrow considered this briefly, then nodded. "You may come, but any attempt to interfere with Cherokee justice will result in your own trial." As Sarah gathered her coat and prepared to leave with the Cherokee warriors, she realized that her choices had led inevitably to this moment. The chain of events that began with her decision to help a wounded enemy was about to reach its conclusion. She thought about Jonathan, wondering if he knew what was happening, if he would try to intervene on her behalf. She thought about her father and James, who would soon learn that their daughter and sister had been secretly harboring Cherokee warriors and was now facing trial for crimes against the Cherokee nation. Most of all, she thought about the moment, 3 weeks ago, when she had looked into Jonathan's eyes and decided that saving one life was worth any risk. Standing now at the threshold of her cabin, about to leave with Cherokee warriors who might be escorting her to her death, she still believed that choice had been right. The alternative, letting Jonathan die when she had the power to save him, remained unthinkable, regardless of the consequences. As they rode out of Millbrook Hollow into the gathering winter darkness, Sarah Mitchell carried with her the knowledge that she had acted according to her deepest principles. Whether those principles would prove strong enough to sustain her through whatever Red Eagle had planned remained to be seen. Behind them, the lights of the settlement grew smaller and dimmer until they disappeared entirely into the cold November night. The Cherokee camp sprawled across a valley floor like a temporary city, illuminated by dozens of fires that cast dancing shadows against the surrounding trees. Sarah had never seen so many Cherokee gathered in one place. Warriors from multiple bands, their painted faces telling stories of battles fought and honors earned. The sight would have been magnificent under different circumstances, but riding toward it as a prisoner stripped away any appreciation for its impressive scale. Swift Arrow led their group directly to the center of the camp, where a massive fire burned before a large council lodge. Warriors parted to let them pass, their faces showing curiosity mixed with hostility as they recognized Sarah as a white prisoner. Children pointed and whispered, while women watched with expressions that ranged from disgust to pity. Red Eagle emerged from the council lodge as they approached, his imposing figure made even more intimidating by elaborate war paint and a necklace of bear claws that caught the firelight. Behind him came other Cherokee leaders, including several Sarah didn't recognize, but whose bearing suggested significant authority within the tribal hierarchy. "The white woman who harbors Cherokee enemies," Red Eagle announced in English, his voice carrying clearly across the immediate area. "Sarah Mitchell, you stand accused of crimes against the Cherokee nation." Sarah dismounted with as much dignity as she could manage, acutely aware that dozens of eyes were watching her every movement. Ridge stayed close beside her, his presence providing some small comfort in the face of overwhelming hostility. "I demand the right to face my accusers and hear the specific charges against me," Sarah said, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed. Red Eagle's smile was neither warm nor reassuring. "You shall have that right. Cherokee, justice, unlike white justice, seeks truth rather than convenient explanations." He gestured toward the council lodge. "We will hear testimony now. The accused will learn the extent of her deceptions, and the Cherokee people will decide her fate." Inside the lodge, Sarah found herself seated on a woven mat in the center of a circle of Cherokee leaders. The arrangement was clearly designed to make her feel isolated and vulnerable, with hostile faces surrounding her on all sides. Ridge was permitted to sit beside her as interpreter and advocate, but his presence felt inadequate against such overwhelming opposition. Red Eagle took his place directly across from Sarah, his dark eyes studying her with the intensity of a predator planning an attack. When he spoke, his words were deliberate and formal. "Morning Star of the Overhill Settlements was brought here yesterday to testify about her supposed treatment of Jonathan Bearfield," Red Eagle began. "She has sworn before this council that she never left her sister's home during the entire moon. When Bearfield was missing, Sarah felt her last hope crumble. Morning Star herself had been brought to testify. There was no arguing with first-hand testimony from the woman they had claimed treated Jonathan's wounds. Furthermore," Red Eagle continued, "examination of Bearfield's injuries by our most experienced healers reveals treatment methods unknown to traditional Cherokee medicine. Clean sutures using white thread, bandages made from cotton cloth rather than traditional materials. Medicines that could only have come from white settlements." Each revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Cherokee had been more thorough in their investigation than she had imagined possible. "Finally," Red Eagle said, his voice rising slightly, "we have testimony from Cherokee scouts who observed unusual activity around the white settlement during the time of Bearfield's disappearance. A white woman is seen moving through the forest at night, signs of someone being carried along paths that lead toward Cherokee territory." Sarah realized that their nighttime journey to stage Jonathan's rescue had been observed, at least partially. The Cherokee scouts Red Eagle had positioned around Millbrook Hollow had seen more than anyone suspected. "These facts lead to only one conclusion," Red Eagle announced. "The white woman, Sarah Mitchell, found Jonathan Bearfield wounded near her settlement, harbored him illegally, treated his injuries, and then participated in an elaborate deception to conceal her crimes." The assembled Cherokee leaders murmured among themselves, the sound like distant thunder. Sarah could see in their faces that Red Eagle's case was convincing. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her guilt was essentially proven. Ridge spoke for the first time since entering the lodge. "What punishment does Red Eagle seek for these alleged crimes?" "Death," Red Eagle replied without hesitation, "and retaliation against the white settlement that sheltered our enemy. Cherokee law demands blood for blood, life for life." "But no Cherokee died," Ridge protested. "Jonathan Bearfield lives because of this woman's actions. How can there be blood debt when no blood was spilled?" Red Eagle's expression hardened. "Cherokee law was violated. Tribal sovereignty was insulted. The white woman interfered in Cherokee justice and deceived Cherokee leaders. These crimes demand the ultimate punishment." Sarah listened to this exchange with growing despair. She had hoped that saving Jonathan's life might count for something in Cherokee eyes, but Red Eagle was clearly determined to make her an example regardless of the circumstances. "I request the right to speak in my own defense," Sarah said, her voice carrying more clearly than she had expected. Red Eagle nodded curtly. "Speak. Tell us why a white woman believed she had the right to interfere in Cherokee affairs." Sarah stood, knowing this might be her only chance to influence her fate, and the fate of her family and neighbors. The words she chose now could determine whether Red Eagle's retaliation would extend beyond her own execution. "I found a wounded man bleeding near my home," she began, speaking to the assembled council rather than to Red Eagle directly. "I didn't," No, he was Cherokee when I first saw him. I only knew he was hurt and would die without help. She paused, gathering her thoughts and her courage. My mother taught me that healing is a sacred duty. She said that when someone is dying and you have the power to save them, refusing to help makes you responsible for their death. Your mother was white, one of the other Cherokee leaders interjected. White law, white morality. These have no place in Cherokee justice. Perhaps not, Sarah acknowledged. But when I learned that the wounded man was Jonathan Bearfield, when I understood that his death would be used to justify attacks on innocent people, I had to choose between Cherokee law and preventing unnecessary bloodshed. Red Eagle leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. You admit that you knew harboring Bearfield would bring Cherokee retaliation, yet you chose to help him anyway? Yes. Why? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words might seal her fate. Because I believed that saving one life was more important than following laws that would lead to many deaths. Because I hoped that showing mercy to a Cherokee leader might demonstrate that whites and Cherokee could find common ground, and you believed that one act of mercy could prevent war. I believed it was worth trying. Red Eagle was quiet for several moments, apparently considering her words. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly, becoming more thoughtful than accusatory. You claim to have acted from noble motives, he said, but the result of your actions was deception. You and your accomplices lied to Cherokee leaders, created false evidence, manipulated tribal politics for your own purposes. To prevent bloodshed, Sarah replied. Everything we did was aimed at stopping a war that would have served no one's interests. Whose interests were you truly serving? Red Eagle demanded. Cherokee interests, or the interests of white settlers who wanted to avoid the consequences of their encroachment on Cherokee lands? The question struck at the heart of Sarah's motivations, and she found herself struggling to answer honestly. Had she really been thinking about Cherokee welfare? Or had she simply been trying to protect her own people? I was trying to serve the interests of everyone who would have died in a war, she said finally. Cherokee warriors, white settlers, innocent children on both sides. Noble words, Red Eagle observed, but actions speak louder than words. Your actions protected white settlers while exposing Cherokee leaders to accusations of weakness and indecision. Sarah realized that Red Eagle was making a political point as much as a legal one. Her interference hadn't just violated Cherokee law, it had undermined Red Eagle's authority and credibility as a war leader. I never intended to undermine Cherokee leadership, she said. I only wanted to prevent unnecessary deaths, yet undermining Cherokee leadership was exactly what you accomplished, Red Eagle replied. Warriors who were ready to follow me into battle began questioning my judgment when Bearfield mysteriously reappeared. Some even suggested that I had been too hasty in calling for war. The personal dimension of Red Eagle's anger was becoming clear. Sarah's actions hadn't just violated abstract legal principles, they had damaged his reputation and political position within Cherokee society. Ridge spoke up again. Red Eagle seeks revenge for political embarrassment rather than justice for legal violations. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from the council fire. Several Cherokee leaders shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the truth in Ridge's words. Red Eagle's face flushed with anger. I seek justice according to Cherokee law. The white woman's motives are irrelevant. She violated tribal sovereignty, deceived Cherokee leaders, and interfered in matters that were not her concern. And yet, a new voice said from the entrance, to the lodge, she also saved a Cherokee life that would otherwise have been lost. Every head turned toward the speaker. Jonathan Bearfield stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the firelight outside. He looked fully recovered from his injuries, dressed in traditional Cherokee regalia that marked his status as a war chief. Red Eagle's expression darkened further. Bearfield, You were not summoned to this council." "I summoned myself," Jonathan replied, stepping into the lodge with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. "When I learned that the woman who saved my life was being tried for crimes against our people." He looked directly at Sarah, and she saw something in his eyes, gratitude, respect, and perhaps something deeper. "Sarah Mitchell found me dying and chose to heal rather than kill. She had every reason to let me die or to turn me over to white authorities, but instead she risked everything to preserve my life. She violated Cherokee law," Red Eagle insisted. "She followed a higher law," Jonathan countered. "The law that says life is sacred, that enemies can become allies, that mercy is stronger than revenge." The philosophical debate was clearly dividing the Cherokee Council. Sarah could see leaders taking sides, some nodding agreement with Red Eagle's legalistic position, others apparently moved by Jonathan's appeal to broader moral principles. "You speak of mercy," Red Eagle said, his voice heavy with disdain, "but mercy is weakness. Our enemies see Cherokee mercy as invitation to further encroachment, further violations of our sovereignty." "And where has Cherokee war-making led us?" Jonathan challenged. "How many of our young men have died fighting battles that solve nothing? How many Cherokee children have grown up without fathers because we chose revenge over wisdom?" The question struck home with several council members. Sarah could see the cost of constant warfare was taking its toll on Cherokee society, just as it was taking its toll on white frontier communities. "You argue for surrender," Red Eagle accused. "I argue for survival," Jonathan replied, "for finding ways to live with our neighbors rather than constantly fighting them. And you believe this white woman represents such a possibility?" Jonathan looked at Sarah again, his expression serious but warm. "I believe she represents hope. Hope that understanding is possible between our peoples, that conflict is not inevitable, that courage and compassion can triumph over fear and hatred." Red Eagle stood abruptly, his patience clearly exhausted. "Enough philosophy. Cherokee law is clear. The woman violated tribal sovereignty and must face the consequences. Then let me face them with her," Jonathan said quietly. The words sent a shock through the assembled council. Sarah felt her heart stop as she realized what Jonathan was proposing. "I was complicit in the deception," Jonathan continued. "I participated in creating the false story about Morningstar's treatment. If Sarah Mitchell is guilty of crimes against the Cherokee Nation, then so am I." Red Eagle stared at Jonathan with undisguised amazement. "You would sacrifice yourself for a white woman?" "I would accept responsibility for my own actions," Jonathan replied. "And I would not allow someone who saved my life to die for showing mercy." The council lodge fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Sarah realized that Jonathan had just changed the entire dynamic of her trial. By accepting equal responsibility for their deception, he had made it impossible for Red Eagle to execute her without also executing a respected Cherokee war chief. Red Eagle's political calculation was clearly visible on his face. Executing a Cherokee leader for showing mercy to enemies would be far more controversial than executing a white woman for violating tribal law. "The council will deliberate," Red Eagle announced finally. "Both accused will remain under guard until we reach a decision." As Cherokee warriors led Sarah and Jonathan to a guarded tent at the edge of the camp, Sarah found herself overwhelmed by gratitude and guilt. Jonathan had just risked his life to save hers, repaying her act of mercy with one of his own. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered as they were secured for the night. "I couldn't do otherwise," Jonathan replied. "You saved my life when you had every reason to let me die. How could I do less for you?" Outside their tent, Sarah could hear the sound of intense discussion as Cherokee leaders debated their fate. The decision would determine not just whether she lived or died, but whether Jonathan's vision of peace between their peoples had any chance of becoming reality. The price of mercy, Sarah was learning, might ultimately be paid by the very person she had sought to save. Dawn came slowly to the Cherokee camp, grey light seeping through the tent walls where Sarah and Jonathan waited under guard. Neither had slept much during the long night, knowing that the Cherokee Council's deliberation would determine not just their individual fates, but potentially the future relationship between their peoples. Sarah had spent the dark hours thinking about the chain of events that had brought her to this moment. A simple act of mercy, helping a wounded man who would have died without her intervention, had spiraled into consequences she could never have imagined. Now, both she and Jonathan faced possible execution for trying to prevent a war that would have served no one's interests. "Do you regret it?" Jonathan asked quietly, his voice barely audible above the sounds of the waking camp outside. "Regret what?" "Helping me. If you had let me die, you would be safe in your cabin right now, preparing breakfast for your father and brother." Sarah considered the question seriously. The honest answer was complex, involving emotions and principles she was still sorting through. "I regret the deception," she said finally. "I regret that we had to lie to prevent bloodshed. But helping you..." She shook her head. "No, I don't regret that. Even if Red Eagle decides we both must die, I would make the same choice again." Jonathan was quiet for several moments. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of emotion she hadn't heard before. "In my culture, when someone saves your life, you owe them a debt that can never be fully repaid. But what you gave me was more than life. You gave me hope that understanding between our peoples is possible. And what have I cost you? Your position as war chief? Your standing among your people? Perhaps. But some things are more valuable than political power." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the tent flap opened, and Swift Arrow appeared, flanked by two other Cherokee warriors. "The council has reached a decision," Swift Arrow announced. "You are summoned to hear your fate." The walk to the council lodge felt like a journey to execution. Cherokee warriors lined their path, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity, hostility, and respect. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed at the sight of a white woman who had dared to interfere in Cherokee affairs. Inside the lodge, the atmosphere was tense with unspoken conflict. Sarah could see that the Cherokee leaders were divided. Some clearly supported Red Eagle's call for harsh justice, while others appeared to favor a more moderate approach. Daniel Ridge sat with the latter group, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes showing concern for the prisoners. Red Eagle stood as they entered, his war paint refreshed and his bearing radiating authority. But Sarah noticed subtle signs of strain around his eyes, suggesting that the night's deliberation had not gone entirely in his favor. "The Cherokee Council has debated your crimes throughout the night," Red Eagle began, his voice carrying the formal cadence of official pronouncement. "We have considered Cherokee law, tribal sovereignty, and the precedent that our decision will set for future relations with white settlers." He paused, his gaze moving between Sarah and Jonathan. "The charges against you are serious. Violation of tribal sovereignty, deception of Cherokee leaders, interference in matters of Cherokee justice." Sarah felt her stomach tighten as Red Eagle built toward his pronouncement. "However," Red Eagle continued, and Sarah caught a note of reluctance in his voice, "the council has also considered the unusual circumstances of these crimes. Jonathan Barefield's life was preserved rather than taken. The accused acted from motives of mercy rather than malice, and both prisoners have accepted responsibility for their actions." An elderly Cherokee leader, whom Sarah hadn't seen before, rose slowly to his feet, His hair was white with age, but his voice carried the strength of accumulated wisdom. "I am White Hawk, keeper of Cherokee lore and traditions," he announced. "In my 70 winters, I have seen much conflict between Cherokee and whites. I have seen massacres by both sides, betrayals, broken treaties, and cycles of revenge that seem never to end." He looked directly at Sarah, his dark eyes surprisingly kind. "But I have rarely seen a white person risk everything to save a Cherokee life. This woman could have let Jonathan Bearfield die and claimed justification under white law. Instead, she chose to heal." White Hawk turned to address the full council. "Cherokee law demands punishment for violations of tribal sovereignty. But Cherokee wisdom also teaches us to recognize when punishment serves justice and when it serves only vengeance." Red Eagle's jaw tightened visibly, but he remained silent as the elder continued. "The council has decided that Sarah Mitchell and Jonathan Bearfield will not face execution," White Hawk announced, "but neither will they escape consequences entirely." Sarah felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. They would live, but what would be the price of that mercy? "Sarah Mitchell," White Hawk continued, "you will be banished from Cherokee territory for the remainder of your natural life. If you are found on Cherokee lands after today, the death sentence will be carried out immediately." The pronouncement hit Sarah harder than she had expected. Banishment meant she could never again travel the western frontier freely, never visit the wilderness areas where she had learned to find healing plants, never feel safe in the forests that had been part of her world since childhood. "Furthermore," White Hawk added, "your settlement of Millbrook Hollow will be required to pay tribute to the Cherokee Nation for 1 full year, 50 bushels of corn, 20 blankets, and 10 rifles with ammunition." The tribute would be a significant burden for a small frontier settlement, but it was far less than the total destruction Red Eagle had originally planned. "Jonathan Bearfield," White Hawk said, turning to the Cherokee war chief, "you will surrender your position as war leader and accept assignment to the Cherokee Council as an advocate for peaceful relations with white settlers." Sarah could see the mixed emotions on Jonathan's face. He was losing his military command, but gaining a platform to pursue the peaceful coexistence he believed was possible. "Additionally," White Hawk continued, "Jonathan Bearfield will escort Sarah Mitchell to the boundary of Cherokee territory and ensure her safe passage to white settlements. This will be his final act as a Cherokee war chief." The arrangements seemed designed to balance justice with mercy, punishment with pragmatism. Red Eagle's desire for harsh retribution had been tempered by the council's recognition that Sarah's actions, while illegal, had been motivated by compassion rather than malice. But Red Eagle was not finished. He stood again, his expression showing barely controlled anger. "The council has shown mercy," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "But mercy is not always wisdom. This woman's interference has set a dangerous precedent that whites can violate Cherokee sovereignty whenever they claim noble motives." He looked directly at Sarah, his dark eyes burning with intensity. "Remember this, Sarah Mitchell. Cherokee mercy is not Cherokee weakness. If any white settler believes your actions justify similar interference in Cherokee affairs, they will learn otherwise." The warning was clear. Sarah's survival had come at the cost of increased suspicion and hostility toward any future contact. Between Cherokee and whites, her act of individual mercy might ultimately make peace more difficult to achieve. As the council dispersed, Sarah found herself wondering if she had truly accomplished anything positive. Jonathan was alive. The immediate threat to Millbrook Hollow had been averted, and she had avoided execution. But the broader conflict between Cherokee and white settlers remained unresolved, and her actions might have inadvertently made that conflict more bitter. Daniel Ridge approached as she stood outside the council lodge, preparing for the journey to Cherokee territorial boundaries. You should be proud, Ridge said quietly. Few people would have risked what you risked for an enemy. And yet Red Eagle is right about the precedent, Sarah replied. Other whites might use my example to justify interference in Cherokee affairs. Perhaps, but they might also use it to justify showing mercy to Cherokee. Change begins with individual actions, Miss Mitchell. What you did may inspire others to choose compassion over conflict. Jonathan appeared beside them, carrying supplies. For their journey to the Cherokee boundary, his war paint had been removed, and he wore simple traveling clothes rather than the regalia of a military leader. The transformation was symbolic. He was no longer War Chief Runs Like Wolf, but simply Jonathan Bearfield, advocate for peace. "Are you ready?" he asked Sarah. She looked around the Cherokee camp one final time, taking in the sight of people she had come to understand were more complex and nuanced than the savage enemies she had been taught to fear. Children played near cooking fires while their mothers prepared the morning meal. Warriors maintained their weapons with the same care any soldier would show. Elders told stories to gathered listeners, preserving traditions and wisdom for future generations. These were people with hopes, fears, families, and dreams, not so different from the white settlers of Millbrook Hollow. "I'm ready," Sarah said. The journey to the Cherokee boundary took 2 days, following paths through wilderness that Sarah had never seen before. Jonathan proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks, explaining Cherokee history, connected to various locations, and sharing stories of his own childhood in these forests. On the second evening, as they camped beside a clear stream that marked the unofficial boundary between Cherokee and white-controlled territory, Jonathan raised the question that had been implicit in their entire journey. "What will you do now?" he asked as they sat beside their small fire. Sarah had been pondering the same question. Banishment from Cherokee territory meant she could never return to the life she had known. Millbrook Hollow itself was too close to Cherokee lands to be safe for her now. "I'll probably go to Nashville," she said. "My cousin Margaret has been asking me to visit. I could practice healing there, maybe teach other women what my mother taught me. And your father? Your brother? They'll understand. They know I did what I believed was right, even if it means we can't be together." Jonathan stared into the fire, apparently lost in thought. When he spoke again, his words surprised her. "There's another possibility," he said carefully. "The Cherokee Council assigned me to work on peaceful relations with white settlers. That work would be more effective if I had someone who understands both cultures, someone who could help bridge the gap between our peoples." Sarah looked at him sharply. "What are you suggesting?" "Marriage," Jonathan said simply. "A Cherokee, man and a white woman, working together to demonstrate that our peoples can find common ground." The proposal stunned Sarah into silence. Marriage to Jonathan would solve her immediate problems. She would have a place in Cherokee society despite her banishment, and meaningful work promoting the peace they both believed was possible. But it would also mean abandoning her own culture, accepting a life among people who would always view her with some suspicion, and taking on responsibilities she wasn't sure she was prepared for. "Jonathan," she said slowly, "I'm honored by your proposal, but marriage should be based on love, not political convenience." Jonathan met her gaze steadily. Who says it would be merely political convenience? The question hung between them like smoke from their campfire. Sarah realized that her feelings for Jonathan had evolved far beyond those of healer and patient, or even collaborators in preventing war. Somewhere during their shared ordeal, mutual respect had deepened into something more personal and profound. The Cherokee Council would never accept a white woman as the wife of one of their advocates, Sarah protested. They might, if that woman had already proven her commitment to Cherokee welfare, if she had risked her life to save a Cherokee leader, and demonstrated that cooperation between our peoples is possible. Sarah considered the proposal throughout the night, weighing practical concerns against emotional attraction. duty to her own people against the possibility of a larger purpose. When dawn broke over the stream that marked the boundary of Cherokee territory, she had reached her decision. Yes, she told Jonathan, as they prepared to cross into white-controlled lands. But on one condition. What condition? We work together as equals, not Cherokee dominating white or white dominating Cherokee, but as partners seeking solutions that serve both peoples. Jonathan smiled, the first completely unguarded smile she had seen from him since their first meeting in her cabin. Partners, he agreed, extending his hand to seal their bargain. As they shook hands beside the stream that had once marked the boundary between enemies, Sarah Mitchell realized that her journey was just beginning. The woman who had risked everything to save one Cherokee life was about to begin a new life devoted to saving the relationship between their peoples. Behind them lay Cherokee territory, where she was now banished, but would soon return as the wife of a peace advocate. Ahead lay white settlements, where she would forever be marked as the woman who chose Cherokee welfare over tribal loyalty. But between these two worlds, beside a clear stream in the wilderness, Sarah and Jonathan had found something neither had expected. Love growing from understanding, hope emerging from conflict, and the possibility that individual acts of courage and compassion could indeed change the course of history. The price of mercy, Sarah had learned, was never simple, but the rewards, life preserved, love discovered, and peace made possible, were worth any cost. As they crossed the stream together, heading toward an uncertain but hopeful future, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that sometimes the most important battles are won not with weapons, but with the courage to see enemies as human beings deserving of compassion. The sun rose behind them, casting their shadows long across the path ahead, two figures walking together toward a future that neither Cherokee nor white settlers could have imagined, but both peoples desperately needed. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.